Seeing that the situation was
Semua
not good,
datang ke
my mother
Minecraft
attempted to
semua
get out, but she
share
and the
ke blog.
monsters were pinned down by giant hands. The next second, the other side had them dead in their hands. 7 years old, I saw the scene instantly frozen in place. When I saw my mother's pained expression, I couldn't help but bawl my eyes out. This huge hand was so strong, my mother
Kita
screamed out in pain. Seeing this, I rushed to find help with hot tears. At that moment, the eyes of the owner of the giant hand instantly lit up. The strength of the hand was slowly increasing, and instantly the woman felt a little breathless. And while gasping for air, she was in a hurry to figure out what to do. The only way to do it now
kita
is to
dah bentuk
concentrate on the power in your hands.
spawn.
The
Aku nak
woman who
bunuh
feels enough
creeper.
power to attack immediately raises her sharp right hand and grabbed it violently towards her opponent's index finger. The gargoyle who felt the stinging pain let out a roar that rang through the sky, while rushing to let go of a few monsters in his hands. The woman who landed on the ground had an instant burst of pain in her fingers. In order to find her daughter as soon as possible, she rushed ahead and ran wildly. But the owner of the zombie was walking slowly from the shadows. A closer look reveals it's a beautiful woman with white hair and red clothes, and shouting, "My child, where are you?" On the other side, I was crying and running away fast, because there was a group of monsters behind me. I just cared about running for my life, a careless, right foot a fracture. I fell heavily to the ground. The monster behind me immediately opened its bloody mouth and came at me, just as I thought I was about to die. But the monster's head was held down by a hand, only to discover that it was another, larger monster that had stopped. A large amount of blood instantly dripped all over my body, just as I thought I was about to be eaten by him. He picked me up slowly, and then steadily put me on the ground, under the eyes of the monsters full of doubts. The monster actually poked me in the back with his finger. In a flash, I was crying and shouting, "Mom!" I peed myself in fear. How I wished my mother would suddenly appear to save me. Just as the monster opened its mouth to devour me alive, suddenly I smelled a horrible scent approaching this way, and the little trash on the side broke out in a cold sweat. The monsters didn't have time to think about it and rushed towards the exit. Seeing them do this, I was standing there with a question mark on my face. At that moment, a foul smell suddenly rushed into my nose, and then a tentacle came out of the dark and hit me in the back. And then I fell to the ground heavily. At that moment, a footstep came from the corner. I saw a little red-eyed, black-clad zombie walking towards me, and he kept chanting, "Come and play." Am I really going to die today at the hands of this little kid? A young boy of 7 years old is looking for a playmate in a lair full of zombies. But the monsters fled when they saw him. Even the powerful chiefs didn't dare to mess with him, just because his mother was the dominant power in the area. With just one palm, she could slap hundreds of walkers to death. But the little girl in front of him had the courage to punch and kick him. In an instant, the two children began to attack each other. The difference in strength between them is not much, and the battle is fought back and forth. Maybe men are naturally afraid of female tigers. After the boy was bitten hard by the girl, he cried and shouted for his mother. Beaten and bruised, he ran away. The little girl standing in the same place is still furious, after seeing the other side run out of his sight, wiping the sweat off his face while laughing. "Damn you little brats, how dare you mess with me?" In fact, it was because the other guy not only knocked her to the ground with one punch, and ate the
Oh,
candy
creeper
she had
creeper.
managed to find, not to mention that the girl's mother is also a powerful zombie queen. As I turned towards the group of spectators, they were surprised by my sneeze and fell
Oh,
away. That's when I smelled the stench coming from my body. I think it was the smell of the little boy who hadn't bathed in 10 years when I fought with him. I felt invincible at this moment. I didn't have time to think about it, so I rushed to my mother, and something caught me just a few steps away, and at the same time there was a
thank
voice.
you.
She gave off a foul stench and must be the child of the underground master. Hearing this, I slowly turned back to look. I saw two tall monsters with red eyes standing behind me. I was shocked to see this scene and shouted out loud. When
Kita
they found
dapat
out I was human, they tried to eat me, but after smelling my body, decided to give up, because I had contact with the child of the underground master. Must have known the direction he left. But when one of them saw my baby face, then the idea of eating me as a snack came up. See the situation. I could only cry and ask them to let go of me to find my mother. But the
Dadah.
female monster actually laughed and said, "Son, how about I be your mother?" Younger me didn't know that the other person was taking advantage of me. I could only whisper my refusal. But the other person thought it was a yes, and she pouted at it. At this point, the male monster on the side was trying to sacrifice me to their father, because their purpose was for their father to improve his strength to beat the underground master.
Okay.
The girl is offered as a sacrifice to the father. His power must have been greatly increased. Hearing this, the male monster replied ignorantly, "I caught it. Let me eat at least one of her arms." After saying I saw the male monster full of saliva, I was instantly scared by this scene and my whole body trembled. I thought, this is the end. If they take me away or eat me, I'll never see my beloved mother again in my life. I clenched my little fist and made a decision that scared them. I turned my head and shouted, "Mom, you're here." And then he ran quickly towards the exit. The two monsters who saw the scene looked at me with question marks on their faces. But they laughed unhurriedly. This weak and powerless little cutie runs really fast. After that, they immediately went after the girl in front of them. At this point, I was still running hard towards the exit. The people in front of me watching them rush towards them. Their jaws dropped in shock instantly. I had to go through them to stay alive, and I kept looking back to see how far the two monsters were from me. By this time, they had already started the massacre of the monsters. Seeing this scene, I thought, I have to find my mother quickly, or I will be there dead too. With that in mind, I ran faster in the direction I was going. But as a child, I couldn't outrun them. Not to mention that the other side was a powerful monster. Soon the tentacles of the female monster were behind me. Fortunately, I happened to have a fall. Perfectly dodged the attack she sent at me. I got up and quickly ran ahead. Soon I was panting and found a corner to hide in. How I wished my parents and sister Gila were around at that moment. Thinking of this, I once again left tears of missing and regret. At that moment, a voice suddenly came from behind me. "My good girl, Daddy's coming. Don't cry." Just when I thought it was my father who found me, only to see that it was the male monster from earlier, and he was reaching out to me with his horrible claws. Looking at the black palm, I trembled and said I wanted to go home, but the hand that was bitten by the zombie was trembling. In the next second, the finger actually attacked the male monster on its own. The spikes instantly cut into the palm of the opponent's hand, yet he looked at the small wound with a careless face, but blinked and a stabbing pain suddenly came. The veins in his hands were bleeding like they were bursting. At this point, he felt his hands were burning, and kept asking me what I had done to him. At this point, I was looking at my index finger with a question mark on my face and sharp black nails. The infected finger underwent a horrible mutation, but the young me was no match for the monster in front of me. Not to mention the fact that after losing his arm, he became even more
Nak
insane.
pergi dia boleh tapi
He
mana tak
wanted
ada
to
ni.
cut this little one into pieces, and then eat she all up, without even a scrap. Seeing that horrible look in the other side, I was so scared that I was shaking all over and backing up. But the male monster's hand had turned into a big knife and was coming at me. Just as the blade was 0.01 centimeters from my head, something suddenly flew out of the dark and hit him hard. The unsuspecting male monster was sent flying for tens of meters before hitting the ground. I was shocked to see this scene. That's when I realized that the thing that just flew by looked familiar. And when I looked closely, it was my father's backpack. I couldn't stop the tears from flowing down my face. I saw my father walking quickly and angrily towards me. "What are you trying to do to my daughter, you monster?" And he took me in his arms and said, "Good girl, are you okay? It's my fault." He smelled my stench, and also saw my fingers mutate. But I was more worried about my mother. I cried and told my father that my mother had been caught by a large hand. Seeing my sad face, he took me into his arms again and shed tears of sadness himself. At this point, the male monster has risen to his feet. The mouth also kept cursing angrily. "Who the hell is it?" Suddenly came out to interfere with my work. "Do I look so bullyable? I'm gonna eat you all up." After that, his arm, which was cut off, grew out slowly. Seeing his opponent's fierce and vicious appearance, my father rushed me to hide behind him. "We'll go to Mother when we've finished with the monster in front of us, and then we'll go home together and eat your favorite cookies." Found ignored by the monster, gritted his teeth in anger. Next thing you know, it's swearing at us, "You fucking human. How dare you look down on me?" And before he finished his words, and a brick hit him on the head. I saw father pick up a brick in his hand and say, "No swearing in front of children." The male monster came at us in a rage after hearing that. The father who saw the scene struggled to swing the brick in his hand, and then he quickly smashed it hard at the other side, but was slashed to pieces by the male monster. But the next second, he felt a deadly danger approaching. He saw thousands of bricks flying towards his face. The attack rained down on his body instantly, and the bear kept picking up bricks from his backpack. and then he fires at the monsters in front of him. I must try to target his weaknesses. Dense brick smashed on the body of the monster, but instantly shattered, and the bricks in the backpack have been used up. The bear froze instantly when he found the empty backpack. Before he could react, the limbs and neck were then bound by the male monster's tentacles. I was worried and helpless when I saw my father suffocating. The male monster in front of me was still taunting. Brat, no more bricks now, right? Even if you throw more, it's useless. My body will repair itself. Did you have a good time just now? I will taste your body slowly. At this point, the father was dying and said, "Kill me if you can." Hearing this, the male monster laughed and said, "I'll send you to Jesus right away." At that moment, a sudden chill came over him. In the blink of an eye, his arm had been cut off by a white-haired woman. Looking at the blood is spurting out of the male monster, still do not know what happened. It turns out that the person who cut off the other's arm was Gila. At this point, her bloodshot eyes were staring at the male monster and saying, "You monster, now you're finished." Saying that she has quickly launched her fierce attack at the monster. The badly wounded male monster could only keep dodging, occasionally found the other side of the breakthrough. He only stretched out his tentacles to counterattack. However, before it could touch her, it was cut off, and the father on the other side was constantly sighing, "She's actually so good. All this way, she killed monsters when she saw them. Now she actually has so much energy. Such a powerful woman. Who is she?" At this point, the male monster's strength has been depleted. The next second, he seems to remember something. The female monster on the other side was happily eating the fresh flesh of the zombie. She inquires to herself, where did her teammate go? After that she thought, has the other team already eaten the little girl? She drooled and laughed at the thought of it. And now I can still smell her flesh. At that moment, something seemed to have tapped her on the shoulder, only to see a woman gazing coldly at her. What sparks will these two powerful zombies spark? Looking at the woman in front of her, she instantly felt a little uneasy. The next second, the two were fighting quickly. This is when the female monster realized that her opponent's eyes were the same as her own father's. It felt like she was one of her own kind. Who the hell is she? By this time, the other man's fist was smashing into his own face. She's such a strong fighter. The female monster intends to see how strong she really is. I saw her reach out her sharp tentacles towards the zombie queen. She looked at the attack that was coming at her so fast. She was thinking about her daughter. The next second, sharp nails emerged instantly, and then she grabbed at the incoming tentacles with a vengeance. In the blink of an eye, the female monster's tentacle was split in half. The pain hit her cold sweat straight, but before she could catch her breath, the other side came at her again. The female monster rushes to attack quickly with her tentacles, but it was easily and perfectly dodged by the opponent. She instantly felt disbelief when she saw this scene. At that moment, the sharp needle of the zombie queen had come to her. She had to use her palm to block it in a panic. The zombie queen looked at the female monster in front of her and thought, "I have to kill each other quickly so I can find my daughter." At this point, the female monster realized that she could not beat the woman in front of her. Suddenly, she felt like she couldn't move her frozen through hands. She couldn't even regenerate, not even the slightest sensation. Only then did she remember that she had not noticed that the other side kept attacking the same place. Is she paralyzing me? At this point, the female monster's whole body kept shaking. She thought, this guy is too strong. I'm no match for her. I can't even touch each other's bodies. Now there's only one last resort. Only she used her tentacle to cut off the split tentacle. Then she bit down hard on her wrist. A few moments later, a severed hand fell to the ground. Next second, the female monster has gritted her teeth and rushed towards the zombie queen. The zombie queen looked at his opponent, who was attacking him at all costs, and thought, there's no time, I have to finish her off and get to my daughter. The female monster has come to her at this point. Just when we thought she was going to deliver the killing blow, she actually sprinkled the woman's eyes with blood from her arm. Unable to see, she rushed to rub her eyes with both hands. The female monster took this opportunity to escape quickly. I can't really win against that horrible monster. Right now, I have to find the male monster and then take revenge. But what she doesn't know is, the male monster was struggling to fight Gila. Whether it is speed or strength, both are similar. But the male monster's body can repair itself. I'm going to kill all three of you humans today. The more you talk, the more irritable the male monster quickly attacked towards Gila, facing the elephant-like monster. She could only hold the axe tightly in her hand, staring at each other with a murderous stare. A few moments later, the ground was covered with blood. The ground was strewn with severed arms and legs. A closer look reveals that the male monster that was screaming just now has had his limbs chopped off, but he's still muttering under his breath. Who the hell are you? You are obviously just an insignificant human. But why am I so miserable? On the side, Gila looks at the puzzled monster in front of her, as if she understood what he was thinking. You didn't think how the soft human is stronger than yourself as a monster. Why do you need to think so complicated? It's really just that you're too weak. And then she swung her axe at her opponent. But the next second, Gila suddenly stopped attacking, because the other side has killed itself. It's a more honorable way to die than at the hands of a human. Father, I'm sorry to disappoint you. Hearing what the other person said before he died, the three people thought, who is the person behind him? The female monster on the other side was still running wildly, and she kept shouting her brother's name. But behind her came the roar of the zombie queen. At this moment she is behind the other side, quickly chasing. You stinking kidnapper, give me back my daughter. The fleeing female monster just happened to run into her brother's suicide, randomly cursing loudly and angrily. You bastards. What the hell did you do to my brother? Meanwhile, the zombie queen arrived panting. Finally, we got you. Where's my daughter? Hearing my mother's voice, I rushed back to look. I was so happy to find out that it was really her. But Sister Gila, who didn't know her mother, was already rushing towards her, just as the two were about to fight. The bear holds Gila's arm in time. My mother was relieved to see that the three of us were safe and sound. She laughed and said, "It's dangerous here. Why did you come here?" The bear on the other side replied happily after hearing, "My family is in danger. Of course I'm coming to save you." But the other side ignored him, just kept asking where her daughter was. Apparently, the mother hadn't realized that I was right behind the father, and kept blaming herself for not protecting me. When I saw her like that, I rushed towards her with a smile. Seeing me unharmed, she shed tears of relief. I then gave her a loving hug. As a mother, don't you notice the changes in your own daughter? The father who was standing by immediately stood up and retorted, "You saved my daughter. I'm grateful to you. But what you said was just too much. It was my fault to begin with. Why take it out on my wife?" At this point, the mother rushed to her feet. Just when we all thought she was going to fight with Gila, but the zombie queen wrote what she wanted to say in the palm of the bear's hand. "Thank you for saving my daughter. It's my fault that she's like this. We have to find the necessary supplies here as soon as possible, and then go to Hope Village and get her medical treatment. I have nothing now. I will repay your kindness in the future." Then she asked for Gila's name. Hearing this, Gila realized what she had done, and she told my parents her name and her relationship with me. After telling the whole story, and they went on a journey together to find supplies, looking at the axe that Gila was holding. The zombie queen suddenly remembered that just now, when entering the lair, it was this axe that flew over the monster's head. Apparently, this woman saved her own life. Our journey to find supplies was anything but quiet. Every now and then a monster zombie would pop up, but before they could touch us, they were killed by two women. Soon we found the underground warehouse. When my father and I opened a package, it was stuffed with all kinds of supplies. Seeing this, we were so happy that we rushed to stuff things into our bags. My hands are holding the snacks that I love. I let out a long-lost laugh, and a light smile came on the faces of my mother and sister Gila. But when my mother behind me saw Gila, who was laughing and talking with me, she thought to herself, she came here just because she was a friend of Jufu's, and killing powerful monsters with ease. She's definitely not an ordinary person. But what can be determined is, thanks to her, Jufu is safe and sound. But why do I still feel so uneasy when I see her? Soon we filled our packs and headed for the exit. My father, who prevented me from running around, actually stuffed me into his clothes. Just when we thought we were going to make it to the exit, Mother suddenly felt an aura of danger approaching us, and there was a constant rumbling in the dark. Suddenly,
Okay.
a pair of giant hands instantly reached out from inside. Seeing this, my mother hurriedly pushed my father and told us to go. In the blink of an eye, those giant hands are already very close to us, but the road ahead was blocked by a horde of zombie monsters. Seeing the giant hand, they were instantly scared and quickly ran towards the exit. But before we could get very far, there were two forks in the road ahead. Just as the father was asking which one to take, the giant hand suddenly reached ahead and blocked the intersection on the right. The father who saw this scene instantly dropped his jaw. It feels like we're going to be buried here today, but a side of Sister Gila can see that the other side is deliberately blocking the road. The zombie queen saw at once that the underground master was playing a trick on us. Now we must hurry and escape. And then suddenly there was an ominous laugh in the dark. 3 red eyes slowly light up at the same time. The crowd didn't have time to think about it and rushed towards the left fork in the road, running and praying that the intersection ahead was the right one. But the giant hand behind us is getting closer and closer, just when we thought the exit was just ahead. What appeared before us was a wall that towered into the sky, and there was a group of monsters standing below. And the mother immediately came out in front of us. By this time, the giant hand had come to the front. Overhead stood the creepy woman in red. Clearly the other side is the powerful master of the underground village. Eyes constantly surveyed us below. When she saw the zombie queen with the
Oh,
mouth
già
full of fangs
vero.
and yellow eyes suddenly laughed. Finally, you found the bastard. The bear on the other side heard and immediately asked his wife if she knew her. At this time, the Corpse King's mind is all about the other side of the scene. I never thought this monster could talk. If you talk about what makes her different from the other monsters, I think it's the lump of flesh that grows on the front of the chest. But why does she have the same color eyes as me? It always felt like she was strange and very
Oh,
at
la
the same
ma...
time. Who the hell is she? Suddenly, the other man's foot hit the ground heavily and said, I have suffered for you, but at this time you are by my side. You took my flesh, and I must have it back. The husband behind her listened and hurriedly asked her if she had taken something from someone else. If so, hurry up and give it back to her and run for your life. However, the zombie queen kept shaking his head to say she didn't take it. The overlord at the front smiled and said, It's not surprising that you don't know me. After all, with my current appearance it is difficult to be recognized. Anyway, all I have to do is kill you and get the body back. Next, will they be able to defeat the master of the powerful underground village? Will they be able to find the exit and go home without any problems? 7-year-old girl dares to point at zombie overlords and swear at them, and beat her son's head bloody. Because in her mind the mother is the most precious in the world. Yet in the face of the overlord, she realized how small she was. With just one hand, she could slap them to pieces. But in order to protect the family and safely leave, Zombie Queen still rushed towards the other side, regardless of life and death. However, the overlord who saw this scene let out a creepy laugh. The hands under the feet fiercely towards each other quickly grabbed. At this time Zombie Queen with sharp claws in the attack to us. In an instant, blood was spurting out. The overlord who saw this scene was incredulous. It was so hard to find this body that was invulnerable to swords and spears. The opponent could easily pierce it with a sharp claw. A stab of pain came over her and she didn't dare to move, only in place to let out a heartbreaking roar. Zombie Queen saw this and rushed to attack her opponent. She must be disposed of as soon as possible she can get her family out safely. But in the next second, one foot was actually tied by something. Bear and Gila, who were fighting the zombie monster, saw the scene and were instantly dumbfounded, because the head at the feet of the overlord stretched out a long tongue to trap the zombie queen's feet. At this point she was only a hair's breadth away from her opponent. However, the overlord's next words shocked her. How was my acting? Did it fool you? Now that you've come forward, I'll be polite. Zombie Queen listened, and a feeling of death instantly came over her, but it was too late to escape the control of the other side, because the long tongue of the overlord
Uh-huh.
had thrown her high into the air. The bear below suddenly felt bad when he saw this scene, and then the father and daughter shouted no. But it was already too late. A white light was seen along with a rumbling sound. Zombie Queen has been thrown from a height by the other side. Seeing this
Oh.
scene, I rushed to call out Mom. After a few moments, the giant hand of the overlord was recovering at a rate visible to the naked eye, and she keeps taunting the zombie queen below. You are so disappointing to me. You want to kill me even with a little character like you? What a fool. Blame it on the fact that you are too weak. Hearing her mocking words, I gritted my teeth in anger. Then I broke away from my father's embrace and jumped to the ground, then desperately rushed towards the overlord, and shouting at the top of her lungs, Don't bully my mother. Seeing this scene, Gila rushed to ask the bear to catch me. Seeing this, he quickly went after his daughter, but every now and then a walker would come along and block the way. He can only kill this monster first in order to chase his daughter, but by this time I had already rushed to my mother's side. I found that her pupils had become black. The zombie queen's mind remembered when she was human. The back of her head was inexplicably filled with spikes. It feels like it's life-threatening to myself and my child. Immediately yanked it outward with both hands and tried to pull it out. The mouth also kept yelling for it to get away. In the moment of crisis, she put all her strength into her hands. In an instant, countless spikes were pulled out by her. Overworked, she sat down on the ground. Just as she was gasping for breath and saying, "I'm okay." She saw a horrible sight, because the other end of those spikes had grown claws, and it was arrogantly approaching itself slowly. Just as she was staring unblinkingly at the other side, the spikes suddenly opened their claws and came at her. The woman who saw this scene was at her wit's end. I could only cover my ears with my hands and shout, "Don't come over here." In an instant, Zombie Queen woke up from the shouting, and it seemed she just heard her daughter's voice. Seeing this, she could only slowly get up with her shattered body. Only when she looked closely did she realize that her daughter was protecting herself in front of her. Even though she was afraid, she trembled and pointed her mutated finger at the Overlord in anger. Seeing this, Zombie Queen trembled and told her daughter to run in a low voice. On the side, Gila and Bear were also shouting. She looked at the Overlord who could poke her daughter with one finger. The Zombie Queen was feeling overwhelmed at this point. Zombie Queen was unable to move because of the severe impact on her body. If this goes on, my daughter will really be killed. But at this point, the Overlord had the patience to ask the little one questions. Who the hell are you? Are you a human or a monster? If it's human, how come it has my flesh? At this point, I don't even want to answer this big devil. And then yelled, "You idiot, don't hit my mother." The Zombie Queen, sitting on the ground, saw the scene and was distraught. But the Overlord was already laughing and walking towards them. Will the mother and daughter be killed by her? And when the giant hand of the other side comes above us, I was really scared to death, because I didn't want my mother to die for me. I couldn't pull her even with all my strength. When she saw this, she immediately scolded me and told me to go. However, at this time, I could not bear to leave my mother behind. Hearing this, the Zombie Queen's eyes were filled with love, thinking, I'm really useless. I can't even protect my daughter. She wouldn't give up, so why couldn't I hold on a little longer? I'm such a disappointment as a mother. With that, she couldn't help but let out a self-deprecating laugh. I had to pull myself together for my daughter and my family. Then she took her daughter in her arms. She didn't know that the spikes on the back of her head were rapidly weakening. In the next second, her whole body suddenly blackened completely. But the Overlord standing on the sidelines was oblivious. Instead, she was still laughing crazily and evil, saying, I'm back at last. But Bear and Gila looked at her with a puzzled face when they heard that. A closer look reveals that the Overlord's giant hand is melting away at a rate visible to the naked eye. Before she could react, an explosion suddenly sounded behind her. Immediately afterwards, the flesh underneath the feet was breaking apart rapidly. The giant hand also expands and explodes like a balloon. Even her own body began to shatter. It was then that she realized that Zombie Queen was awakening. Only when she looked closely did she realize that her opponent was already several meters away from her, and the body had split open. The two men stood looking at each other's decaying flesh and instantly froze in place. They don't know what the hell just happened. Only I know what happened in that short time. At that moment, my mother had an extra spike on the back of her head. Seeing the other side's combat power instantly increased several times, the Overlord's face became gloomy down. She looked at the arm that had been decayed to nothing and said, I admit that you are very strong, although I would like to end this mercifully. But you're getting worse and worse. Said a pair of giant hands had quickly grabbed towards several people. In an instant it came above their heads, just when we thought she was going to crush them to a pulp. But the Overlord grabbed dozens of walkers off the ground. Immediately after, it opened its huge mouth that could devour everything. And the next second, she threw the corpse into his mouth and swallowed it. Below, we were filled with shock at the sight that appeared before us, for by now the Overlord had become as tall as a mountain. The slightest stomp of the foot shook like an earthquake. The saliva dripped from her mouth like a waterfall. It is as if we had become her food. And then giggling and striding towards us. The only word I could use to describe this scene was big. However, the cold sweat on the father's head was rising. He thought, it's impossible to kill her. Even hiding or running away was nonsense. She killed us as easy as squashing an ant. At that moment, my mother suddenly handed me to my father. Her eyes were as if she was praying to her husband to take care of her daughter. Looking at the mother's face, we already know what she's going to do next. No matter how much father tried to stop her, it was useless. If you're going to leave, you're going to die this time. Before the words were finished, his wife's hands were on his cheeks. Then she laughed and said, Darling, wait for me to come back. I will end this and bring you home. Bear listened and clenched his fists tightly. He actually wanted to help, but as a human he was too weak. And he promised his wife that he would take care of his daughter, for not to worry her as a wife and mother. Father and daughter smiling and saying goodbye to her. Zombie Queen also smiles and turns towards the massive Overlord. But in the next second, the crowd was looking ahead with frightened eyes. It turned out that the Overlord had come to them at that moment. Seeing this, my father hastily hugged me and left quickly. The Overlord looked down at them like ants and laughed. I really can't understand. How could someone make a reckless choice to protect his family, even though I have a family? But this sacrifice is too strange. Children must obey their parents and put us first, to repay us for the kindness we have given them. This is the real family. By now Zombie Queen had flown up behind her and replied, "What kind of family is that? That's treating them like slaves. People like you are not worthy to be parents." And with that, the spikes on the back of her head were swinging towards her opponent. Just as we thought the fatal blow pierced the opponent's heart. But suddenly a wall of flesh appears to block her attack. Then mocked, "You're really annoying, you cheeky, shameless guy." The words are not finished. The giant hand has swung heavily at Zombie Queen, but instead of dodging, she blocked it with her side. So she did it just to get close to the other person, followed by a quick scratch on her arm with a sharp nail. Just when she thought her plan would work, both feet were suddenly tied up by each other's tentacles. Even with all her efforts, she could not get out. Before she could react, and she was yanked in the other giant hand of the Overlord. "How dare you scratch my arm, you fucking bitch. I'll crush your whole body to pieces." Can the Zombie Queen, who is in the hands of the opponent, struggle to escape? At this point, the Zombie Queen is starting to feel a little dizzy. Just when she thought she was going to be squeezed to a pulp by the giant baby, the Overlord's body suddenly and inexplicably tilted. The next second, she fell directly to the ground with a heavy knee. Zombie Queen also took the opportunity to break free from her grasp. A closer look reveals it turned out to be a bloody hole that had been gouged out of her right foot. It turned out that it was the mighty Gila who had seriously injured her opponent. The Zombie Queen is seen escaping from the giant baby. She hurriedly shouted, "I'll buy you time. You take out the Overlord as soon as possible." Hearing this, Zombie Queen quickly stood up. With that, he shouted and flew towards the other side. On the other side, Hilla also rushed towards the giant baby, not to be outdone. In order to protect the family, Zombie Queen completely blackened. "Even if I die, I have to find a way to get my husband and daughter out of here." Hearing this, Hila, who was fighting, said, "Bear, you take Jufu away just fine. The two of us stayed behind to block. You should be able to hold her and get out of here safely." Apparently, the other person was Hila herself. Either of them wants to lose a loved one. To make sure that everyone gets out in one piece, we have to kill the giant baby that's as tall as a mountain. Saying that, the two instantly exploded into unprecedented combat power, facing the Berserk 2. A giant baby is not a sheep. In an instant, the arms and legs became twice as big as they were a moment ago. And then she roared at them with a roar that rang through the sky. But the Overlord at the head of the giant baby didn't care. "A bunch of insignificant little pieces of crap. This fearless choice will only get you killed for nothing." The two of them, in concert with each other, have created a fierce wind. Hiding on the sidelines, I took in the amazing battle. At that moment, both my father and I heard a voice suddenly coming from the shadows. With puzzled faces, we turned our heads to look. It was a black child. I looked closely and remembered that it was the same kid that I had beaten up and fled. When my father saw him, he asked me with a puzzled face, "Who is this dark little friend? And he smells so bad." Hearing this, I hurriedly replied, "He bullied me. He hit me with the hand that could reach out so far." And before I could finish, my father laughed and said he would teach the other man a lesson. But when he saw the creepy little monster, he had an uneasy feeling. He didn't know that when the black kid saw the girl who had beaten him to death, he wanted to swallow his opponent alive with his hands clenched in fists. I found that the other side looked at me with that murderous look. At this point, I was bold enough to make a face at him. The boy who saw this scene ran towards us while shouting, "Come and play." The father kicked and cursed, "Get out of here, you little brat." The child found the big shoe in front of him, momentarily stopped and stood still hesitating. The father thought when he found that the other side was weaker than he thought. How could such a weak monster boy be here? Usually when a monster feels danger, it runs away. Why would he come alone to such a dangerous place? By now the boy's attention had been drawn to the battle nearby. He looked at the massive monsters towering over, and on top of the gargoyle's head stood a woman with white hair. He instantly became dumbfounded and muttered under his breath, "Come and play." The bear, who was standing on the sidelines watching the other side, was full of questions. Don't even know what the little kid just said. At this point, the battle there had reached a white-hot stage. As a human, Hila has been beaten with blood and sat on the ground motionless. Zombie Queen was also covered in blood and gasping for breath, because at that moment she was once again in the hands of the giant baby. And the overlord from above said, with a face full of disdain, "This is the reality. Whether you're sacrificing for your family, or reveal the hidden mighty power, are useless. You now have only despair. What's with that look in your eyes? It makes me look really nasty." The Zombie Queen is staring coldly at the overlord. If her eyes could kill, she would have killed him hundreds of times. The giant baby saw the other side looking at her mother like that, and then he opened his bloody mouth. The long tongue even reached the Zombie Queen's face, as if she was going to be eaten in the next second. Just as Zombie Queen was about to fight to the death, there was a sudden shout from behind. The two women quickly turned their heads in the direction of the sound, only to find that the bear was holding up the boy, shouting, "Put my wife down, or I will kill your child." The Boldney also screamed at the sight for her to let go of my mother. Looking at the boy who had some resemblance to himself, the overlord said, "Isn't this the master's child? What do you rubes want to do with him?" Zombie Queen saw this and told them to run. "Do you even have to ask? Take him as a hostage, of course." Hearing this, the boy was instantly frightened and shouted, "I didn't expect the overlord to say coldly, 'You want to threaten me with affection?' It doesn't make any sense at all. It's just superfluous." Then she wanted the giant baby to slap the people below to death. However, in the next second, she felt a sudden stinging pain in her fingers. The bear below listened and held up the boy and shouted sternly, "So I let him sunbathe without fear?" The boy kept crying, "Come and play off." At this point, the overlord's eyes were filled with wonder, because her hands were shaking uncontrollably. Unexpectedly, the boy below suddenly shouted "Mom" with tears streaming down his face. Hearing the familiar voice coming from the overlord's pupils instantly light up. She remembered the scene once. At that time she was happy with her son every day, feeding him his favorite meat, stroking his cute baby cheeks with both hands. And by now she was trembling all over with tears. The black eyes on her chest felt that she was emotionally affected, trying to get out of its grip. With the sound of crunching, the overlord instantly felt the heartbreaking pain and kept screaming. Obviously, Black Eye understood that she had been shaken when she saw the child. Is this the most powerful thing about a mother's love? It has no choice but to take the body first, then control the giant hand to release the Zombie Queen in her hands. Will she be able to defeat the overlord and save her family and leave?
Sorry, Eugen.
7-year-old boy runs to a lair full of zombie monsters in order to find his mother, but none of them dared to provoke or stop him. They saw him and fled as if they had run into the devil, not only because of the foul odor emanating from it's more because his mother is a horrible overlord. But he finally saw his mother after a lot of difficulties. At this time his mother was fighting a man and a zombie, but controlled by the Black Eye. She didn't recognize him anymore. Even if he was used by the enemy as a captive, mother didn't care. Well, when the little boy cried out for his mother, the mother's love of the overlord's heart made her a little shaken. Seeing this scene, Black Eye hurriedly took control of her body, intending to pull itself out of this body with its hands. But in the next second, an axe suddenly slashed at her wrist. A closer look reveals that this is a seriously wounded Hilla using her last ounce of strength to launch the attack. Black Eyes just reacted. Zombie Queen's claws have swung to the overlord's chest. At this point, the Black Eye instantly flew out of her body. The crowd below saw this scene and exclaimed, "Is it going to work?" The Zombie Queen saw this and immediately reached out to kill him. But when the claws were just a hair's breadth away, the Black Eye whipped out a spike and pierced her palm. Feeling the sting, Zombie Queen hurriedly withdrew her arm. She found that the Black Eye had placed a small tentacle on her hand, and it was wriggling and squirming. The black-eyed floater who had succeeded in his plan was smirking. The Zombie Queen saw this and quickly swung at it with her other hand. A figure suddenly flew by in the dark. A hand snatched away the Black Eye that had almost been killed. A closer look reveals that the visitor is actually female monster who was beaten by Zombie Queen with only one breath left. Zombie Queen found that she was still alive. She immediately rushed towards the female monster. As she was about to attack, a stab of pain came from the spikes. Unable to control her body, she quickly fell downward. Unwillingly, she sighed, "What a nightmare." Can only watch the female monster holding the Black Eyes from above to escape. At this point, the father and daughter below suddenly shouted for Zombie Queen to get up and hide. It turned out that the giant baby who had lost its back could not control its body and was smashing towards her. But at this point, she didn't have a single ounce of strength left. She couldn't move at all. She could only watch as the mountainous baby smashed into her. Yet my father and I saw the scene, but didn't panic and went looking for it, because we knew that with my mother's physical strength, she would not be killed. But after searching for a long time, we only found a seriously injured Sister Gila. I gave her a big hug, but she was still worried about my health. Just as my father was about to ask her where my mother was, we then saw a familiar figure slowly rise from the rubble. The zombie queen regains consciousness and rushes to look into her own hand. She found that the tentacles had disappeared. She looked at the overlord lying on the corpse of the giant baby and thought about it. And although she didn't catch that back eye, it was finally over. Now, if kill the overlord, we can easily take the supplies here. This is a rare opportunity. With this in mind, sharp claws emerged from her fingers, just as she reached out to kill the overlord. Suddenly her arm was grabbed by a pair of hands tightly. Turning his head, she found that the other man was the son of the overlord, and he kept saying under his breath, "Mommy, come play." The overlord who heard the child's voice was dying and reached out to answer him. Seeing this touching scene, everyone's emotions instantly felt very sad. Hearing his mother call himself, the child was in tears. But the zombie queen still looked at him with those cold eyes. The next second, she heaved a long sigh, and then she used the spikes at the back of her head to quickly lash out at the overlord's chest. Then the corpse poison was poured into her body in a continuous stream. The helpless little boy could only cry on the sidelines, banging the zombie queen's ass with both hands. Seeing this scene, I rushed back and begged my father, but he smiled at me and said, "Don't worry, your mother is helping to heal her wounds." As a little girl, I didn't know what my father was saying. I could only, with a face full of questions, looking at him, was giggling. It didn't take long for the zombie queen to pull out the spikes, and then scolded the little boy, "Stop fighting. It hurts so much." Frightened, he then sobbed and withdrew his arm. At that moment, a familiar voice suddenly came. Only then did he realize that his mother had gotten up and called out to him. In an instant his tears came out like a flood, and then they both held out their hands. The next moment, they were already holding each other tightly together. They were crying tears of joy. Zombie Queen, who was standing by and watching the scene, exclaimed, "Mother and son look so much alike. No matter how scary the monster is, it's the same as me. We're all parents who love our children, and that's enough." At this point, the daughter also threw herself into her arms. And with that she said to mother, "Let's go home." And then they went on their journey home. I waved goodbye to the little boy as I was leaving, seeing this strange action of mine. He thought for a moment and then waved at me like I did. On the other hand, the black-eyed female monster said to her father, "Don't we have to absorb the blood of the underground overlord?" The father in the front replied, "It doesn't matter. Anyway, I'm fully nourished." However, the female monster who had fought with Zombie Queen was a little worried, because it was harder for them to find the mother and the daughter. I don't know where they are at this time, but her father told her not to worry about it. He already knew where they were. Once he gets his body back, he will become a very powerful zombie. There is no need to absorb the perfect whole. He then asked the female monster to tell the cannibal church friends, tell them to bring the mother and daughter to him. What exactly did he want to do next? After a difficult battle, we were able to get our supplies and leave. On the way home, we had to fight as few walkers as possible. Once the encounter is not Long-Eyed will be Sheila's sister and Axe to Kill. After all the fighting we did, we arrived home safely. And just when I was happy about that, Father realized that Sister Gila had disappeared behind him. Only a bloody axe was left on the ground, only to find that she had fainted in the corner from exhaustion. When she woke up again, it was 3 days later. The first moment she woke up, she saw me with a worried face, but she kept saying Xiaoya's name. Seeing this, I rushed to shake her and cried, "Sister Gila, have you lost your memory? Who is Xiaoya?" "I'm Zhufu." Feeling pain, she hurriedly asked me to let go of her hand. And then she got up and stroked my head and asked, "Where is this?" I cried with joy at the sound of her familiar voice. "Sister, you fainted. My parents helped you with a simple treatment." Before I could finish, a voice came from outside the door. I looked and saw that my parents were standing outside the door calling us to dinner. Hearing this, I hurriedly smiled and pulled Sister Gila forward. When I arrived in the living room, I saw a steaming pot of noodles. The father was eating it with tears and snot. I rushed to pick up the bowl and join him. But behind me, my mother was thinking about something with a serious face. Yet my father was talking and eating without a care. Hila was looking at her pink clothes with a puzzled face and asked me, how did such an ugly dress get on her? After hearing that, I replied while laughing, this is my mother's dress. The bear who was eating didn't forget to look at Hila's muscular body. Seeing the scars on her body, she is definitely not an ordinary person. Thinking of the image of her being able to work with her wife to fight the giant baby before, the bear gulped in fear.
Oh. Oh.
I asked Sister Hila to rush to play with herself after she finished eating. But even though she said yes, but her eyes were fixed on my infected finger. The father on the sideline saw that the situation was not right, rushing me back to the room to count. From 1 to 100 they came to play with me. The innocent me ran back inside happily immediately after hearing, slamming the door heavily in the process. Seeing this, Hila hurriedly asked the father. The child's nails had become shorter. Did you help cut them? The bear took a long sigh before he slowly said, her nails look like this every 2 days. The doctor in Hope Village should know why. But on the way there, those cannibals don't know if they're going to do anything to my wife and daughter. I don't know if it's safe to arrive at the village yet, so I'd like you to come with me. Of course we'll compensate you as much as we can. You just have to escort me back from Hope Village. He also handed her a large bowl of noodles. I didn't expect Hila to put down the bowl she had finished eating and replied coldly, you don't let your wife protect you, but you come to me? Do you think I would not hesitate to say yes to you? And he took the noodles from the bear. But you seem to have forgotten what happened in the underground village. At that time you have some emotional illusions about me. Don't be ridiculous. I don't give a shit about you guys.
Oh.
Why should I bet my life to help you guys? And just when we thought Hila would refuse, she said again, I'm not going to help you, but we'll go together. I'll just protect Jufu like I always do. The rest is up to you. Hearing this, the bear immediately agreed, but a zombie queen aside said, what are you talking about? What if you're in danger all by yourself? The bear, helpless, can only force a smile. I'll protect myself. You don't have to worry. By now the zombie queen was staring coldly at Hila on the sidelines. She thought, what a woman who doesn't know how to be flexible. It was the same in the underground village. Why are you so desperate to protect someone else's daughter? This always feels like she's Jufu's mother. At this point, I suddenly ran out of the room and shouted, you guys are too much. Why isn't anyone coming to me? Seeing this, Sister Hila hastily agreed to accompany me to play. Suddenly a hand grabbed my arm tightly, just as I was feeling confused. The other hand was also caught. Looking closely, I realized that they were my mother and Sister Hila, who loved me. The zombie queen was thinking, stinky bitch, if you want to be a mother, you can have one yourself. Why are you looking for my sweet daughter? This woman is really no good. In the blink of an eye, the two were about to explode in anger at each other. The bear next to him is eating the noodles in fear. As he ate, he thought, since Hila is willing to go along, it really put my mind at ease. Now it would be nice to just get a car that I can drive. Early the next morning, Hila and Bear set out on a journey to Hope Village. And while they were looking for a car they could drive, an ear-splitting cry for help suddenly rang out from the tall building above. The two men with question marks on their faces instantly stopped in their tracks. Then they looked up to the source of the sound. The nosy bear turned around and tried to rush up, but he was grabbed by Hila and scolded angrily. You stay out of other things, you brat. Don't forget what we came out for this time. You don't even have the ability to defend yourself and you want to help others. I advise you to put your mind on your daughter, or I'll kill you right now. Looking into Hila's eyes full of anger, the bear stammered in a cold sweat and replied, I have a good idea. How about you listen to it first? But Hila's face instantly became very grave when she heard it. It turns out that there was a girl up there who was being chased by 3 men. At this point, she was cornered and had nowhere to go. The 3 people behind her were still telling her to give up her resistance. Soon the girl was already tied up by them. She sat on the ground shivering. The 3 men were talking recklessly on the sidelines. It's a shame. It's so hard to catch a girl. We should enjoy it before we make plans. But was stopped by an associate on the sidelines. If this is done, then she won't be worth anything in Hope Village. But what if the people there don't need her? By now the girl was trembling all over with tears on her face, but her mouth kept whispering teacher. At that moment, they said with a bad smile on their face, if they don't want it, of course is to use her remaining value cleave before throwing away. By now one of them was drooling and stroking her cheek. Honestly, I hope Hope Village doesn't want you. In that case, you're mine. The sound of a weapon hitting the ground behind him before he could finish his sentence. He rushed back and cursed. What the hell? He saw a strong man was firmly strangling his accomplice. He just reacted to a heavy kick to the face. The two accomplices who had broken free rushed towards the exit, but they just ran 2 steps. A fist had smashed into the face of the man in front of him, and then he fell to the ground with a bloodied face. The accomplice behind him immediately chided, "Who are you?" But in return for Gila's murderous stare and cold words, "Hand over everything if you don't want to die." Hearing this, the 2 men swung their weapons and rushed towards Gila. "You're the one who should hand over the stuff, you crazy bitch." But before he could touch Gila, she dented his face. At this time Husband untied the girl, sobbed, and thanked the bear. The girl's name is Gowingshi. Also know that she came from Hope Village. The bear laughed with a smug face after hearing this. "Gila, look, we've come to the right place. We were lucky enough to save the people of Hope Village. Don't be angry anymore." She laughed when she learned that the 2 were preparing to go to Hope Village. "Our village is very welcoming to people as strong as uncle and sister. Today is my first time out to promote the village." 2 people listened to the moment, froze long time speechless. But in his heart he was secretly happy that he had not expected to meet the people of the village, and so reliable. This is simply destiny, right? At this point the girl handed the 2 a poster saying, "If you come, the dean and the teachers will be very happy." Just as the bear took the poster and was puzzled, the 2 men suddenly felt a dangerous aura coming on. Next, Hira instantly blocks a strong man's attack with her axe. He then said coldly, "Are you all in this together? Release my family immediately, or I will cut you down." At these words Bear and Gila were full of questions. Don't know who his family is. It was then that she stepped forward and explained, "Teacher, they saved me. I'm sorry, I should have followed you." The man listened to the cold face before squeezing out an ugly smile and said, "I apologize to you for my unreasonable behavior. After all, it happened suddenly." And the bear on the other side felt a little uneasy in his heart, because he found that Inshi's legs were shaking constantly, and her voice was trembling. They did not know that the hand of her teacher on her shoulder was slowly forced, but with an ugly smile on his face that said, "Next time you must follow me well. You know I don't like to say the same thing over and over again." By this time, Inshi was in pain, but the teacher was too strong, and she didn't dare to resist. Just when we thought she would beg for mercy, the smile on the man's face suddenly disappeared. A closer look reveals that the hand on Inshi's shoulder has been grabbed by the bear and lifted up. "See," the man coldly said to him, really bothered. "I don't like to hold hands with men." He said that his hand with the weapon is slowly forced. Gila and Inshi, who were standing by, suddenly felt a little uneasy. Just when we thought 2 big men would fight. But the bear suddenly grinned and said, "You are the teacher of Hope Village, right? Nice to meet you." And with his other hand, he pushed aside Inshi. She was not only good at introducing Hope Village, she was also very good at praising teachers. The man who heard this turned his head to look down at Inshi. Smartly, she immediately gave a hand signal to the other side, with eyes full of trusting eyes. The eyes of the man who saw this scene instantly glowed red. At this point, he introduced himself to the bear and said, he is none other than Bai Xiaoming, the teacher of Hope Village. By simply knowing and understanding, and they were released from their wariness of each other. Little Bear asked, "Can our families go to Hope Village too?" Then he introduced Gila, who was his wife, and a sick daughter waiting at home. After saying that, the bear felt a coldness coming on. Hearing this, Bai Xiaoming then laughed and said, "We have a doctor in our village. Of course there's no problem, but you have to pay your own expenses. Then I have to go and tell the village first. I'll meet you tomorrow at the same time under this building." And then taking she and walked towards the exit. Before she left, she even bowed to the 2 men to express her gratitude. When the bear turned his head to tell Gila to go home, only to be kicked hard in the leg by his opponent. Apparently, his presentation just now had annoyed Gila. So what's their next step? In order to get to Hope Village to find a doctor as soon as possible. When Bear and Gila got home, they rushed to pack their bags. And his wife bandaged his daughter's corpse poisoned finger. In the process, my mother was full of sadness for me, because I had never left home since I was a child, and not